The first competitive season of Riftbound is opened with a pretty lopsided meta throughout its first 5 events, with Kai'Sa taking 4 out of the 5 first place titles. These results from China's early regional events and the first national event have suggested a rather concrete meta, with Kai'Sa firmly at the top, Master Yi tailing a bit behind, and most of everything else struggling to land top 8 finishes. But with the first regional event to take place outside of China just on the horizon, things could shake up a bit in the near future. I'm Rose with 4 Hearts, and today we're going to take a look at the current Riftbound meta for November of 2025. Just as a quick disclaimer, the rankings in this video are based off of a somewhat rudimentary point system I developed to quantify legend appearances and placements. The point of this system and this video is to get an idea of what players should expect to see at official events based off of prior events and inform their decision of what legend they should play based on their goals. These rankings don't necessarily correlate with what the strongest decks in the format are, as TCG metas are always live and changing day to day. If you want more information on my system or have any suggestions, then check out the description and feel free to share your thoughts. Unsurprisingly, Kai'Sa has easily claimed the top spot in the meta with 3 regional wins, 1 national win, and the top play rate at 4 of 5 events. At the first regional in Guangzhou, she only had a 20% share behind Master Yi and Viktor, but after winning the event with half of the top 8 decks, it became very clear that Kai'Sa was the deck best suited for the highest caliber play in this opening format. This translated into a consistent share of at least 30% at every event since the first regional. Throughout this string of success, she's been incredibly adaptable, winning 4 events with 4 rather distinct deck lists. Players initially leaned heavily on the strength of her early game control and mid-range aggression while slowly incorporating Time Warp as an additional closer for Thousand-Tailed Watcher. As of now, it seems that the early game aggression and control with a little bit of mid-range tempo has become the most popular philosophy. This is likely because of the general builds of other legends starting to become a bit faster and more consistent. While it's possible that other decks could start to threaten Kai'Sa's titles at international events, you should expect mostly more of the same dominance, at the very least in terms of popularity. Holding down the S tier by himself, Master Yi has made a name as the best Kai'Sa counter. While this is mostly true, Master Yi was already the most popular deck at the first regional, before Kai'Sa had officially proven herself. With a second place finish at every single event so far, 17 top 8 finishes, and 1 regional title of his own, Master Yi has inarguably been the most consistent deck in the format so far. The nature of his legend ability to simplify the game down for his player, while complicating combat for opponents due to his domain combination, has resulted in a dominant force for the first set of a new TCG. While the playstyle here is very one-dimensional, it's so effective for a limited card pool. As we begin to see competitive play at an international scale, there's no reason to discount Master Yi as a consistent top 4 finisher for the remainder of this format. That said, beyond this set, there could be some things left to be desired in future formats. Moving all the way down to the C tier, due to Kai'Sa and Master Yi's dominance, Viktor's representation at the tournament so far has been a bit misleading. With a top 3 share at every event so far, you would think that this would lead to or be the result of substantial success at the top end of tournaments, but that just hasn't been the case so far. Viktor had a strong showing at the first regional, with 3 top 16 finishes and 1 in the top 8, but since then has only landed in the top 32 twice at regionals and once at the Shanghai National. All of his top placements have been achieved with rather similar builds, suggesting that his best list is relatively set in stone already, or that experimentation isn't netting positive results. Either way, at this point, it doesn't seem like Viktor currently has the tools needed to compete with the most refined list at the end of tournaments. If the meta evolves in a way where Kai'Sa isn't overwhelmingly present, then there could be a world where Viktor starts to see some more success internationally, but I wouldn't count on that. Miss Fortune has been a really fun legend to watch, as she's been one of the more underrated legends in this middle pack of the meta. Despite having a comparatively low play rate that's steadily ranged from 5 to 9%, she's consistently achieved top 32 placements, finishing in the top 16 6 times at 3 of 5 events so far. While she's clearly not as dominant as Kai'Sa or Master Yi, she's proven that she's more than capable of making deep runs and is always in position to take multiple players into day 2 competition. Everything she's achieved so far has been with very similar builds, making her one of the more consistent legends in this fringe top 3 area of the meta. While she hasn't claimed a top 8 finish yet, Miss Fortune is a somewhat underrepresented deck that has to be respected if you're aiming to reach top 8 yourself. Moving into international play, don't be surprised if Miss Fortune sees a small surge in popularity as more players start to tap into her potential. Sett has spent the early events of the season as a rather underrated pick for competitive play. Commonly believed by the Western world to be a top 3 legend in this format, Sett hasn't been given much opportunity to prove his worth in China's competitive scene, only surpassing a 5% share one time in the recent national. Despite the low play rate based on some expectations, Sett has reached a top 32 in all but 1 event so far. At the Hangzhou regional in particular, he had 2 players finish in the top 8, proving that he's more than capable of holding his own against top decks. It is worth noting that only one Kai'Sa reached the top 16 at that tournament, and an Ahri also snuck her way into the top 8, so the results of that event were a bit unique compared to others. It seems like the best Sett builds are steadily becoming more refined, and if his play rate surges the way it's expected to in international play, you should expect to see a bit more Sett in the top cut than we've seen so far. Rounding out our C tier, Teemo has held an interesting position in the meta so far. With one top 8 at the first regional, he's been stuck floating around the top 32 as his top placement in each subsequent tournament. With how gimmicky of a deck Teemo can be, it kinda seems like their early success was because of the player base's lack of experience with the game. But even with a slight dip in performance, consistent top 32 placements in a format that's been largely dominated by 2 decks is nothing to scoff at. So far, the top placing Teemo builds have been bouncing between various cards to help the deck lean into different aspects of the game and Teemo's playstyle. It's clear that the Perfect 56 is still a ways away from being discovered for the Yordle, which could explain the slump that he quickly fell into. It'll be interesting to see how Teemo's performance is impacted by international play, as the skill floor for this deck is relatively high and will continue to get higher as the player base gets better at the game. Starting things off for our unranked legends, Ahri's season so far has been relatively quiet with one specific bright spot. Initially holding a fringe top 64 identity, Ahri shocked the meta at the Hangzhou Regional with a 7th place finish thanks to the new inclusion of Ahri Alluring and Time Warp. Before this switch, every top placing Ahri build had run Ahri Inquisitive as their chosen champion, and none had utilized Time Warp. This result proved that with the right read on a tournament's meta and some creative deck building, Ahri has a significant amount of potential, but when things play out as normal, she can become rather stagnant. Immediately following this regional, she failed to crack the top 64 and barely snuck into the top 128 as her top placement at the Shanghai National. While these numbers do seem much worse, the tournament was 4 times the size of all the regionals. If Ahri has any more creative tricks that have yet to be discovered, then she could make a couple more deep runs in international play. But if her list is mostly solved as is, then don't expect much more from this legend for the remainder of the Origins format. Annie is the legend that's been pretty back and forth so far, with top placements ranging from 22nd to 165th. After finishing in the top 32 at the first regional, it became clear that Annie's Vi Destructive and Ride the Wind combo is one of the best finishing combos in the format. The core of aggro spells, discard support, and a highly efficient closing combo has been Annie's preference to build around, and it seemed like the list was all but solved after the first regional. But after failing to reach the top 128 with the same list at the Beijing regional, Annie has been reevaluating how to best support her core in every tournament since. As a deck with a low barrier of entry but deceptively high skill ceiling, it's not terribly surprising that Annie has been able to reach day 2 of competition with some consistency without ever going the distance. If Annie has a deeper bag she can reach into, then she could become a sizable threat internationally. But it is starting to feel like she's running out of tools that can push her into the top levels of tournaments. As one of the primary faces of Modern League, with a unique style of play compared to most other decks, Jinx has been a bit of a disappointment so far. After falling just short of the top 64 at the first regional, she failed to make the top 128 at any other event. Every top placing Jinx build has brought pretty dramatically different lists, with most of them finishing around the same point in each tournament. The silver lining here is that the top placing Jinx at the Shanghai National held a pretty similar placement to Beijing and Hangzhou's top placing loose cannon players in a much larger tournament. So it does seem like progress is being made and players are getting better at the deck. But similar to Darkchild, it's starting to feel like Jinx doesn't have any viable answers for the top decks in this meta. A key difference here is that most of Jinx's shortcomings come from a lack of supporting cards for her reckless, discard-oriented playstyle. So while it's best to shelf Jinx for this set, don't be surprised if she sees a rise in power in future formats. Another legend that's been a bit of a disappointment, Darius showed some really promising signs at the first regional. With 3 top 64 placements, it seemed like he was just a few steps away from achieving some late tournament finishes, all before continuously slipping throughout the next 3 regionals and finishes outside of his top placement. His popularity dipped so low that he's the only legend that has seen a lower play rate than Garen at an official event, with only one Darius player showing up to the Hangzhou regional. That said, it seems like a new page has been turned as Darius finished just outside of the top 64 at the Shanghai National after a new baited hook build rose to the occasion. While this is far from a meta-defining placement, doing this well at a national bodes well for the form Darius can potentially take at international events, especially considering that the baited hook iteration of Darius has been popular for quite some time now in the West. It won't be surprising to see 1 or 2 Darius reach a top 64 at future events, but the real test is how much his day 2 conversion will increase if he does see a growth in tournament share. Lee Sin has created a reputation of being the final bastion of mid-level play before heading into the top caliber players at events. Falling just outside of the top 64 at every tournament so far, Lee Sin seems to have the most clearly defined ceiling of any deck in the first set. Whether he's leaning fully into his buffs with Sett as a complementary champion, or copying the supportive cards found in Master Yi's tempo iterations, he just can't seem to pull together a list that can perform consistently enough to crack the top 64. This is indicative of a deck that has decent matchups all across the board, but doesn't excel in any noteworthy meta matchups that can support a deep tournament run. As a hybrid of 2 of the stronger decks in this format, you would think that Lee Sin would have placements comparable to Master Yi and Sett. But the buff playstyle seems to have some significant limitations in how Lee Sin likes to utilize them. Unless he can land on a tight-knit 56 that can raise his overall win rate or key into a few specific meta matchups, you should expect more of the same stagnation for Blind Monk moving into international play. Yasuo has certainly been one of the more contentious and polarizing legends in terms of how good he actually is or isn't for competitive play. With an extremely high skill ceiling, it doesn't always seem like Yasuo is much stronger or more efficient than other decks for how difficult it is to pilot him. The first two regionals netted results comparable to Lux and Garen, and while he had one standout performance at the Chongqing regional, his low play rate and mostly lackluster finishes have kept his power level on par with Lux for most of the season so far. Much like the champion in the video game, Yasuo's legend feels like one designed to be one-tricked. It takes many hours of practice to understand the flows of this deck and how to get the most out of this legend, Yasuo's champion units, and many other cards and combos in the deck. This is becoming evident in his steadily increasing top placements in recent events that have led up to a top placement barely outside of the top 64 at the Shanghai National. While he's had a slow start, expect Yasuo to land some more favorable finishes as players get better at the game and more comfortable piloting his deck, especially as you consider that his strongest build has varied heavily from event to event. Leona has left a lot to be desired so far in this opening season. On paper, her playstyle of converting decent offense into really strong defense should be netting consistent results as an average deck at worst. Instead, she's only managed to crack the top 64 one time in these first 5 events. The main cause of these underwhelming performances is likely due to the speed in which she plays. A strong aspect of Leona's game is that she's not usually picky about what options she has in hand, as she can get plays done through a variety of combinations. But her deck requires a turn or two her setup to get her strongest units and plays ready, and she has a hard time setting up multiple layers of offense compared to other mid-range decks like Sett and Lee Sin. It seemed like things were starting to turn up after the Hangzhou Regional, but after performing the worst of any legend aside from Garen at the Shanghai National, Leona might just not have the pieces necessary to make a substantial impact on this format. Volibear has really made his presence known as the premier feast or famine deck out of the handful of legends that can utilize Dazzling Aurora. As a legend that pretty much relies on the gear to stay competitive, it's been interesting to see his synergy with the card influence his placements at official events. After being one of the worst legends at the first regional, a 13th place finish at Beijing proved that Volibear can do serious damage when the stars align. It seemed that his placement returned some false hope to Volibear players, as his tournament share doubled at the following 2 events before falling back down to 1% at Shanghai, an event that was arguably his best of the season so far outside of Beijing. While Dazzling Aurora builds certainly aren't the most consistent, they can't be ignored for long as they naturally perform better when players aren't expecting them. This dynamic perfectly explains Volibear's season so far and encapsulates any expectations you should have for Relentless Storm moving forward. As the main control deck in the format, it's a little unfortunate that Lux's stealing is holding the archetype back so significantly. Despite her low power level and even lower play rate, her one top 64 finish at Chongqing Regional suggests that the control archetype does have a valid place in Riftbound. Her top builds so far have also been pretty interesting, as her main deck has started to become more refined and her sideboard has become a unique toolbox that's equipped to handle a variety of decks. Lux's legend ability also isn't that bad generally speaking, but she doesn't have many pieces to consistently build advantages off of for tempo or combos. In a meta where the strongest decks are able to consistently hold with high efficiency or conquer with high frequency, Lux's slow start to games just hasn't been able to keep up. If we come across a slower meta in the future, or we see greater value big spells in the mind and order domains, then there is potential for Lux to do some damage in the future. But as it currently stands, Lux just doesn't have what it takes to contend at the highest level. Closing out our legend profiles, we have a legend that is so unappealing that he wasn't even played at the first regional event. Garen is the only legend to have a 0% share at one of the 5 tournaments that have been held so far, and it's not hard to understand why. Playing Garen basically feels like playing the game without a legend. He's the only legend to have never seen a day 2, and is also the only legend who didn't finish in the top 500 at the Shanghai National. These results prove that Garen's design has been pretty faithful to the champion, as he's easy to pick up and could probably stomp players who had never played Riftbound, but it's very likely he'll never be viable in competitive play. The only reason we'll continue seeing his legend throughout the rest of his lifespan is for players who want to claim his best of prizes. Otherwise, you can consider this legend a non-factor unless something comes out in future sets that can dramatically impact the viability of his legend ability. Taking a final look at the current power rankings, we have one legend in the OP tier who's been dominating competition so far. If you're looking to win a major event, then Kai'Sa is by far your best option, as only one other legend has managed to do so. And if you're just looking to make day 2, she's an incredibly safe pick. Holding down the S tier is Master Yi as the legend who's had the best response to Kai'Sa, but still doesn't love the matchup for a variety of reasons. Master Yi has won 1 regional so far and is certainly capable of winning more, but can be expected to remain in Kai'Sa's shadow for the remainder of this format. Then we have 4 legends who have landed in the middle of the pack thanks to some early success, recent success, or consistently high shares in tournament pools. These are definitely some underrated picks if you're looking to play something that's competitive but not at the center of the meta. And then we have 10 legends who have really struggled to make much of an impact. If you're looking to do well at a major, then it's best to avoid these champions for the time being. That wraps up our power rankings for November 2025. If you found this video helpful, feel free to like and subscribe. Good luck in your games, and thanks for watching.